So Matthew chapter 10, verses 2 to 4, part 1. Last week we introduced Jesus calling the apostles, disciples/apostles. Now today's passage shows all those 12 people. And it says, now the names of the 12 apostles. I believe you heard the meaning of the word apostle. Usually, what do they teach you? Apostle means the people who are sent out. Apostolos is the noun format, but this is what we usually hear. But is that what it is? Do we have to take a look at it? There's a theologian, D.A. Carson is a New Testament theologian. He's well-renowned. He wrote many books, and he is kind of authority in the New Testament. In his book, Exegetical Fallacies, he pointed out few mistakes we make as pastors and teachers, because we just look at the root of the word and saying, that's what it means. Easy to conclude it that way, but you have to see the context as well. It's good to know the root or etymology, but you have to learn the context, how it was used. So in his book, he said this, actual usage in the New Testament suggests that apostolos commonly bears the meaning of special representative or a special messenger rather than someone sent out. But if you look at the New International Dictionary of New Testament Theology and Exegesis, that's 5-volume dictionary, thousands of pages, right? So it's not just like one volume set, it's very detailed. And this one has the word, how it was used in the regular secular literature, because this Greek word is not Bible exclusive. This word was used by the people who wrote their literature, Homer, all those people used it. And yes, that was used to mean the ones that are sent out in those literatures. But it says this, the New Testament uses this noun only in the sense of messenger, and particularly as the fixed designation of a definite Christian office, which is apostleship. So when you hear the apostles, doesn't mean the people who are sent out, okay, we have to send out people, missionaries, don't think that. Because it's all about the people who are bearing message for Christ and then sharing that message with others. So those names, 12 people, chapter 10, verses 2 to 4, and we have Mark, Luke, they all have 12 people listed there. It starts with Peter, it ends with Judas Iscariot. Two different places, same thing. Peter, Judas Iscariot, Peter, Judas Iscariot. There's one more place you can see the disciples or apostles' name, which is Acts chapter 1. But Acts chapter 1 has only 11 because Judas Iscariot is gone by then. Let's take a look at this one as 3 different groups, since we have 12 conveniently divided into 4 in one group. The first group, of course, Peter, first name mentioned. Second group always starts with Philip. And the third group always starts with James. If you take a look at the Mark chapter 3, the last bullet point, James, Thaddeus, Simon, and Judas Iscariot. Luke chapter 6 says James, Simon, Judas, and Judas Iscariot. So where's Thaddeus in that list? Right, so that's Judas is the Thaddeus, same person. Because Judas in this Luke chapter 6, he's the one who asked question to Jesus in John chapter 14. And when he asks question, Bible clearly says Judas, not Judas Iscariot, asked the question. So that's the one. Let's take a look at Apostle Peter, because we're not going to be able to go through individual apostle one at a time. We can't, because we just don't have enough information in the Bible. But Peter, we have so much information, so at least we can take a look at the Apostle Peter. If you look at John chapter 1, it says, now Philip was from Bethsaida of the city of Andrew and Peter. That means they're all coming from that city, Bethsaida. That's way up to the northern part of Galilee. So we know the meaning of Bethlehem in the Old Testament. Bethlehem. The Hebrew word Beth is house of, bread, right? House of bread. So Bethsaida is house of fishing. It's originally Aramaic, but it's used in Hebrew anyway. Of course, Galilee, what do you expect? It's all fishermen, right? Peter, Andrew, and Philip, all those people. So that makes sense. And then Acts chapter 15 says this: Simeon has related how God first concerned himself about taking from among the Gentiles a people for his name. Who's Simeon in Acts 15? That's Peter. The Simeon is the name, the second son of Jacob, right? That's a Hebrew word. Has nothing to do with Simon, but because it sounds alike, they use Simon in that sense. So Peter was called Simon as well. As a side note, Simon in Greek, that means literally flat-nosed. But Simon is such a common name. We have at least 10 people in the New Testament. I'm not sure that was the reason, but Jesus started calling him Simon, I'll call you Peter. When I first came to America, I noticed that American people have naming convention. First name, middle initial, and last name. In Korea, we have last name and first name, basically. No middle initial. But since we live in America, I wanted to change that the American way. My original Korean name is Sang Myung, so I put Sang Y Sim. So my brothers followed that too. I have 4 more brothers, other brothers, and their names are all Sang. Sang H Sim, Sang M Sim. So it was confusing everyone. 5 Sang in our family. So when I was getting my citizenship, my wife called me, why don't you call yourself Peter? So I changed my name to Peter and then put my Korean name as a middle name, right? Cephas, Aramaic, meaning rock. It's not really name, it's more like a translation of what rock means, but he was called as rock, Cephas as well. Peter had many different ways to be called: Simeon, Simon, Cephas, Peter. And we have to take a look at his relationship with Jesus. Right? He was very close to Jesus. And Mark chapter 9 says, 6 days later, Jesus took him with Peter and James and John. This is a transfiguration. It took place in Mark, Matthew, and Luke, all 3 gospel messages. That's what we call synoptic gospel. We have 4 different gospels, but synoptic gospels are first 3, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, right? So he brought them to that mountain, and he showed them that miracle and talking to Moses and Elijah. And we have so many different other references too, but Mark 14, Jesus went up to Gethsemane. He took with him Peter and James and John and began to be very distressed and troubled. He was not in a good mood, right? It was a really difficult place to be, and then praying to God, it's not my will, but your will. And that's when he took those 3, again, Peter, James, and John. So even Jesus had close disciples. And I'm hoping that all of us can be close like that, right? That's what happened though. Peter, James, and John. And Luke chapter 12 says this. Peter said, because after Jesus mentioned about some parables, Lord, are you addressing this parable to us or to everyone else as well? He was curious about it. So when people say those things, you have to feel comfortable to ask that question. Because one time I was explaining about manna. I mean, she was in middle school, I think, and she raised her hand. Pastor said, yes, what was manna taste like? I don't know. I never had a chance to eat that, but let's take a look at the Bible. So it's a good question, right? Never thought of that kind of question. So that's good environment. That's what Peter did. And of course, Matthew chapter 16, Jesus asked his disciples, who do you guys say I am? And Peter raised his hand, and then you're the Christ, the Son of the living God. And then, great. So he got this compliment from Jesus. Blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah. Bar-Jonah is Aramaic expression, son of Jonah. Other references in different places, Peter was referred as son of John. Jonah and John are completely different names. So I'm only assuming that Simon Peter's father had 2 names. Anyhow, because flesh and blood did not reveal this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. Great compliment. You got it, Peter. That's great. That's Matthew 16:17. But afterwards, Jesus mentioned about his anticipated suffering, death on the cross, and resurrection. And what did Peter say? Lord, don't let that happen to you. That's no good. We don't want to lose you at all. But Jesus turned and said to Peter, get behind me, Satan. So Peter was scorned big time here. I mean, he said, you are a stumbling block to me, for you are not setting your mind on God's interest, but man's, right? That's what happened. He was thinking about these things in a worldly way. That tells me this. Jesus and the way he taught the disciples and the way disciples interacted with Jesus was very open. Because if you ask question, then actually some of the other people will have the same question. That's how I like the way it's supposed to be. So in my class or during the sermon, if you have a question, just ask me. If I don't have the answer, I'll get back with you after the research. So again, that tells us how open it was between Jesus and his disciples. Great environment. Let me ask you a question. In the Roman Catholic Church, the priests, they're not supposed to marry. Of course, there's some Bible verses you may say, okay, this one actually indicates that you're supposed to be dedicating your life all in for God's work. But this one, 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verses 5 and 6, says otherwise. It's Paul writing this letter to the people in Corinth. He was not happy about them in this passage. He was asking two main questions here. He's right as an apostle. Two different things. Having a wife and not working. And he said this, do we not have a right to take along a believing wife, even as the rest of the apostles and the brothers of the Lord and Cephas? Cephas is Peter. All the other apostles, they were taking their wives to their ministry. They're there together. Or do only Barnabas and I not have a right to refrain from working? Church in Corinth. You guys are not supporting me, so I'm going to work. But I have all the right to get financial help from you. And guess what happened? He was working as a tent maker, and the church in Philippi helped him, Apostle Paul. Not church in Corinth. They didn't care. So it's amazing. And then Mark chapter 14 says this. But again, he denied it. So it's a denial of Jesus 3 times. It's the second time recorded in Mark chapter 14. And when I get there in Matthew, I'm going to explain to you more about it by going through Matthew, Mark, and Luke, all 3 different Gospels. The second instance that he denied in Mark, it says this. But again, he denied it. And after a little while, the bystanders were again saying to Peter, surely you are one of them. For because you are a Galilean too. All Peter did was, I don't know who Jesus is. I don't know what you're talking about. He was answering to the people who are accusing him being one of Jesus' friends or disciples. But at the end, they said, you are a Galilean also. Surely you are one of them. How did they know? As I showed you, Galilee, and then way up there, Bethsaida, right? So it's right there, the northern part of Israel. Even in America, if you go down to south, they have certain accent. If you go up to New York, they call coffee, similar to that. I'm not really quite there yet, but something like that. Based on their accent, you can tell, oh, you're from Texas. One time I met this Korean guy who grew up in Texas. He looks like Korean, but he has Texan accent. Think about that. You can tell by their accent. So Galilean had their accent. Those fishermen, they have accent. So when they say something, they could tell. It's not good or bad. They could tell where you're from. So he struggled. He denied Jesus 3 times, and he was running for his life. But guess what? Again, this one, someday I'll explain to you more in detail. John chapter 21, he met Christ, resurrected Christ. 3 occasions, Jesus asked Peter, do you love me? And he said, yeah, you know I love you, and all that. 3 times at the end of that conversation, Jesus commanded these: tend my lambs, shepherd my sheep, and tend my sheep. Twice, tend my lamb, tend my sheep. That means feed my sheep, feed my lamb. Feed them with food. That's what it means. Very basic idea. That's what it means. The second one, he said, shepherd my sheep. That shepherd, the word itself, has same meaning or root as pastors. So if you look at Ephesians chapter 4, verse 11, some English translation says shepherd and teachers. So that's the list of a gift and different offices that you can serve. That's what it lists in Ephesians chapter 4. But that one, until that point, every single position, every single role had the definite article in front. But this one has only one definite article, the pastors and teachers. It's one. You can distinguish them, but pastors are teachers. That's their main role. How do I explain this? Pastors and teachers, they're the same thing, but two different things, but the same. Peanut butter sandwich. I mean, if you only have peanut butter, then that's not sandwich. If you only have two slices of bread, that's not peanut butter sandwich, right? You have to have both to say peanut butter sandwich. You can distinguish them. This part is bread, a little bit burned, in my opinion. When then peanut butter is there, that's fine, but that's peanut butter sandwich together. Pastors and teachers, they're together. Okay? Yes, thank you, Monica. Exactly, all right. It's not about peanut butter sandwich, it's about pastors and teachers, okay? All right. Then, how and what do we feed God's sheep? What are we supposed to do as a shepherd, as a disciple, as a Christian? What are we supposed to be doing? We got to remember Jesus again, because we looked at those instances that they met together, Jesus and his disciples in John 21. The context is this. Simon Peter went up and drew a net to land, full of large fish, 153, and although there were so many, the net was not torn. It goes on. The story we all know so well. 153 fish. Some people say, okay, that 153 means this. If some people go to hell, hell only lasts 153 days. That's a wrong theology. It has nothing to do with hell. 153, don't think too much of it. It's just 153 fish. That's all that means. And the second bullet point says, Jesus said to them. So that's why naturally we only remember about fish in this passage. But second bullet point says, come and have breakfast. None of the disciples ventured to question him, who are you? Knowing that it was the Lord. They knew. Jesus came and took the bread and gave it to them, and the fish likewise. And guess what? Verse 14 says, this is his third appearance after his resurrection too. Third appearance. He asked Peter 3 times, do you love me? Peter denied Jesus 3 times. A lot of number 3, but don't think too much about the number either, okay? But the focus is not about the fish here. He said, come and have breakfast. They are the fishermen, but instead of them feeding Jesus, Jesus was the one who came and took the bread and gave it to them. And then think about this. Not the fish first, but the bread first. Bread was not even mentioned in this passage until this point. So he was feeding them. Guys, you've been fishing all night long. You couldn't catch any fish, but here we go. I'm going to give you bread and fish as well. What does that mean? We have to remember what Jesus told them, Andrew and Peter especially. And he said to them, follow me, and I will make you fishers of men. It goes back to our Sermon on the Mount, the conclusion in chapter 6. Do not worry about what to eat, what to wear, but seek for his kingdom and his righteousness first. I made you guys as the fishers of men, not the fishermen and worrying about what to eat and what to wear. Don't do that. That's what he did. So this is what happened. Fishers of man. And there is, in Acts, now Peter is not afraid of anything now. Peter and John. And there is salvation in no one else, for there is no other name under heaven that has been given among men by which we must be saved. There's no other name under heaven except for Jesus for us to be saved. So verse 13, people are amazed. What is this? What's going on with this Galilean? They have accent. And now as they observed the confidence of Peter and John and understood that they were uneducated and untrained men. These people have no formal education. They're not rabbis, but they're preaching and teaching on the street. They were amazed and began to recognize them as having been with Jesus. Only thing is, they don't have good education, but they have been with Jesus Christ. Yes, these disciples were not well educated, but how about Paul? He was the best of the best, cream of the crop. What does it really tell us? It doesn't matter what our backgrounds are. It doesn't matter how much education, how much money we have on this earth. Look at the 12 disciples. John MacArthur wrote this book called 12 Ordinary Men, referring to the disciples, just basically ordinary, common people he chose. And they're the ones who are endowed by Jesus. You guys go out and spread the gospel message, make disciples of all nations. That's why we're here. So if you think about apostles and prophets, we should have some respect for them, yes, but in James chapter 5, it says this, Elijah was a man with a nature like ours, just like all of us. He was just like people, like a human being, just like all of us. And he prayed earnestly that it would not rain, and it did not rain on the earth for 3 years and 6 months. Imagine praying that way. God answers your prayer. Miracle happens. Then he prayed again, and the sky poured rain, and the earth produced its fruit. Elijah, the prophet, the apostles, they are the people just like us. Conclusion. 2 Timothy chapter 2, verses 1 and 2. It's directly from Paul to Timothy. He said, You therefore, my son, be strong in the grace that is in Christ Jesus. It's not you, it's not your background, it's not your skill set, but you have to be strong in Christ. The things which you have heard from me in the presence of many witnesses, entrust these to faithful men who will be able to teach others also. 2 Timothy was the last letter that Paul wrote. He's giving him this last words to Timothy. Timothy, do this. That is exact reminiscent of what Jesus told his disciples, especially Peter, feed my sheep. So that's the main point. So Jesus Christ gave them the order or command, you have to feed my sheep, make them disciples, the 12 apostles. By and large, they have been successful. So that's why we're here, worshiping Christ. And today's believers were supposed to continue that race. It's not just for the 12 disciples or apostles. If that was the end of the game, then we don't have to do anything. That means that Bible passage that we just read and studied, it doesn't apply to us, but it all applies to us. It's all relevant to us. So that has to continue. It can be in your family settings, it can be your friends, even in church. Some people may not know Christ. So we have to do this. The things which you have heard from me in the presence of many witnesses, entrust these to faithful men. You got to find some faithful people who will be able to teach others also. But did it start with Jesus Christ? No. It started in the Old Testament. If you look at Shema Israel in Deuteronomy chapter 6, you have to love your God because God is one. And then keep the words in your heart. And what did it say? You got to teach your children day and night. So we cannot limit that into our family members. It's anybody we interact. We're supposed to spread the gospel message. So my prayer for you is that when Jesus comes back, he will call every single one of you, saying, good and faithful servant.